Hello and welcome to our panel, Elevating Black Design Voices. We are so happy that so many of you are with us today. We posted this only a week ago and got a really overwhelming response. So we're thrilled about it, and it obviously illustrates the need for this discussion. So we hope that this is just the beginning of this dialogue on the subject. Before I pass the baton off to our moderator, I just want to introduce myself real quick and our organization. My name is Gina Gray. I'm the current president of the board of directors of the University and College Designers Association, UCDA, who's hosting this event. I'm also an art director at the University of Dayton in Dayton, Ohio. And if you aren't familiar with UCDA, it's a professional organization for creatives working in higher ed. We provide programming and professional development opportunities for both staff designers and design educators. UCDA's mission is to inspire designers and to elevate the importance of design overall. So today's panel was really born from a desire to support and learn about what it means to be a Black designer and why there is such a disparity and lack of representation in our country. In the 2019 design census by AIGA, only 3% of designers in the US self-identify as Black or African American. So we wanted to understand why that is, what racism might exist in higher ed. And we wanted to use this platform as a way to elevate and listen to more Black design voices. So without further ado, I'd like to pass things off to our moderator, Pierre Bowins, who will introduce himself and our panel of designers and educators. So welcome, Pierre.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I will be moderator today, as Gina mentioned. I am assistant professor at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. I'm a maker, educator, and a self-proclaimed design historian. My research is based upon the omission of the Black American designers that are not mentioned in today's design history canons. I can't express how excited I am to be your moderator for today's panel discussion. But before I get started, I want to first thank the UCDA, specifically Gina Gray, president of UCDA board, Chris Klodowski, the assistant director of UCDA, Ted Busey, who's here with us today, and Amanda Redmond. Thank you so much for giving us this glorious opportunity to elevate these Black design voices. So today's esteemed panel consists of designers, educators, professionals, and a recent design graduate is on our panel as well. So without further ado, I'd like our panel to give a brief introduction and tell us a bit about yourselves. So we can just go right down here. Tara, if you don't mind going first.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm Tara Masthay. I recently graduated from the University of Dayton in May, and now I'm currently a freelancer.
Ali, if you want to jump in.
Hi, I'm Aliatu Burke. I am the Director of Creative Services at Miami University. Have over 25 years experience as a designer, started out in corporate brand design, worked several years at Wall Street Journal, and a few years at University of Virginia, from which I moved from there to Miami University.
Lucy?
Hi everybody, my name is Lucy Kimundi. I am originally from Kenya. I've been doing design for close to 20 years now, and I am the Assistant Director of Design Services in Kennesaw State University, which is in north of Atlanta in Georgia.
Tasheka?
Hi, I'm Tasheka Arceneaux-Sutton. I'm an Associate Professor of Graphic Design at Southeastern Louisiana University. I'm also a faculty in the MFA program for graphic design at Vermont College of Fine Art. And I also run a studio called Black Voice Graphic Design. And my research and interest is very similar to Pierre, where I I'm doing research discovering Black designers who have been omitted from graphic design history.
Mark.
Cool. So I'm Marq Mervin, pronouns he, him, his. I'm an educator at Florida State College at Jacksonville, teaching digital media. And I told this I did this in my last introduction, but I'm a situational full-time nerd, meaning I'm definitely a full-time nerd, but based on the fandom, you know, I don't want people checking my nerd card. So if we're talking anime and cartoons, we can do that. But Game of Thrones, that's outside of my lane. So yeah, let's connect afterwards.
And Silas?
Hi, I'm Silas Monroe, pronouns he, him. As far as nerddom, I can fill in the gaps for Mark around Game of Thrones. So if you want to go there, I can help. But I just actually got promoted. I'm an associate professor at Otis College of Art and Design, which is here in LA. Yes, thank you. I also am on the faculty at B.F.A with Tasheka. It's also how I know Pierre. And I run a design studio called Polymode that is based both in Inglewood and also Raleigh.
All right, thank you everyone. So at this time, I want to remind our visitors to please keep their microphones muted. If you have any questions, please submit them to the chat window. The questions from our audience will be addressed as they arise or at the end of the discussion as time permits. All questions may not be addressed due to the expansion of dialogue. So please understand that there may not be time to respond to every question, and questions will be considered based on pertinence and commonality as we roll along here. All right? So we're gonna jump right in with our first question. I'm gonna put the first one on you, Mark, all right? So what does it mean? What does it mean to be a Black designer, and why do you believe there are so few Black designers?
Oh, you're gonna start me with the hard question. Okay. Well, gee whiz. What does it mean to be a Black designer? I think it leads into a question, or rather a conversation of what does it mean to be a designer? You know, like, is it visual design or visual communication in different industries, all that type of stuff. And additionally, it also means that you have a different experience, a different perspective, and different worries and concerns, where you always have to be top notch. You always have to be, you know, work twice as hard to get half as far. Black tax is definitely a real thing, much like brown tax, you know, and it also means you don't really have an off day, where not necessarily off from work, but you have to be on point, helpful, you know, an expert in your field, you know, everything always up to date. It's some extra pressure, you know, but I think that's a part of the experience. At least that's a part of my own experience. And I'm sure that so many other people can speak to their own as well, but there might be that commonality. And I rambled a bit, so could you repeat that second part of the question?
Yeah, the second part is, why do you believe there are so few Black designers?
I think there's a multitude of answers for that. One area I think I can speak to on the education side is I think there are so few Black designers because design education, I don't think, is fully promoted or pushed in K through 12 education. So I know when I was growing up, I never thought about graphic design. That wasn't a thing for me. I knew I wanted to make art and I wanted to draw, but graphic design wasn't exposed, or I wasn't introduced to it until I stepped into college, and I just happened to take an elective. So I think that a way to address some of those gaps would be to introduce design education through K through 12 students through things like STEAM. You know, so we've heard of STEM, science, tech, engineering, and math, but with STEAM, science, tech, engineering, art, and math, or STREAM, including reading, you know, I think that's an area that we can also incorporate the design education to show what design is, demystify it, and really just break down what we do as designers. And I think if we do that early, then from there it has a a better chance of sticking. And then instead of students saying, oh, and this is not to, you know, detract from any other career, but instead of, oh, you know, I want to only be a doctor, or I can only imagine myself being, you know, an engineer, or, which is great, or just a few other careers, but then we can say, oh, I can imagine myself being a designer. I can see myself being, you know, making websites, making apps. And now there's a term for it. And then once they see it, then they can pursue it. So.
Lucy, what are your thoughts?
Well, having kind of a different background, I grew up in Kenya and actually was introduced to design in high school. So my thoughts of being a Black designer is, one, you got to be hardworking. It doesn't seem to come easy. I feel like you got to prove yourself. And on my case, my growing up, the exposure, because I remember talking to my parents, telling them, well, I want to be a designer. And they were like, what is that? And, you know, I had to explain that to them. So listening to Mark saying, you know, talking about exposure, you know, from K through 12 or into the STEAM program, that exposure is really important. It gives young adults an option to view other careers that they can definitely pursue and exceed in. Also, what I learned in my life was that graphic design is not it's not a cheap course. It can be quite costly, and that can actually be a deterrence to, you know, some parents saying, hey, look, why don't you find something that is cheaper? So I guess that will be my, one of the reasons why we have few designers, one, exposure, and definitely the cost. At least in my experience, that's what I realized. And you gotta be one, you know, hard-headed child to push your parents and say, no, this is what I want to be, and even prove it to them. Because I remember telling my dad, well, you see all these things, you know, you go to a restaurant, you got a menu, you look at a product, somebody had to sit down and design that, and that's what I wanted to do. So, but yeah.
Yeah, I really understand the economical point that you make in that. From my perspective, the economic, you know, to me in America, is you see these big schools like Micah with these big price tags. And a lot of people forget that the smaller schools that I'm at now, I'm representing UMES, you get it for half the price, you know? So they've really got to look around, you know, if you want to be a designer and find a cheaper price tag on it. Other schools have it. Yes. You know, it doesn't have to always be that huge art institution that you are looking forward to. Not to downgrade them or anything. They're great institutions.
Oh, I totally agree with you.
But they have big price tags.
Yes, they do. Because when I started looking into this, the schools that I was looking into was SCAD, and I did go there, but I was like, boy, can't do this. Ended up at the Art Institute of Atlanta, which was reasonable, but then come to find out, even the public universities, state universities offer the same program. So yeah, research, definitely do a little bit of research just to find out, you know, where you can get the same thing at a better price tag.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anybody else like to add to this?
I'll jump in.
Yeah.
So I think being a Black designer means if you're in school, most likely you may or may not be one of the few Black students. It means that you probably won't have a professor that looks like you or come from a similar socioeconomical background. It means that in history class, you won't learn about anybody that looks like you. It means once you get to the workforce, you probably have the same experience of being the only Black person. As far as why there's not as many, I think the economics definitely plays a key role into it. I think definitely, you know, if you think about a lot of minorities, they are being, you know, a lot of parents don't want their kids to study art in general, right? So the idea of, you know, picking a field that's a little bit more, I guess, doesn't guarantee anything, not that there are any guarantees, but being a doctor, a lawyer, if you grew up watching the Cosby Show, things like that, seem a little bit more tangible, are kids, you know. And I think that the thing that actually plays into it is what I said before about the lack of knowledge. So if you don't know anybody that's a designer and who have success, it's probably a little difficult to aspire to be something that you don't have access to, right? I think also it's expensive, right? I mean, I remember my experience, my first year of grad school, we had our own studios, and I was the only person that didn't have a computer or a printer in my studio. I had to use the lab to do my work. So for the first year of grad school, I had to walk down a hill. I went to Cal
I
Arts.
think that's good. I don't think we need any other technical words.
And it was on a hill, and so I had to walk down to Kinko's every week, twice a week, to get my
Oh,
work
wow.
in color, because I didn't have, and I lost a lot of weight, which was great. So it was good exercise. But
Kinko's,
it kind of sucked, you know? So I had to stop working probably 2 hours earlier than other people to go and get my work printed to be prepared for the critiques. And so on top of that, I think it also leads students to a disadvantage in that their work sometimes isn't presented in the most professional way because they don't have the money or the resources to present their work in a way or to meet the standards, right, that people are sort of expecting.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with Tasheka. I remember those days at Kinko's getting fireys, which were $10 a proof. And when we had survey, you had to present a semester's worth of work, and that was almost a few $100s. And education is expensive. I went to Pratt, which is a private art school, and it was expensive. And I think that a lot of Black students, when they come out of high school, they don't have the luxury of pursuing careers that are passion, but more pursuing careers that will put them in a successful light to raise a family, buy a home, and all that American dream stuff. I know I was growing up, I was not shaded away from art school. My mother was a secretary, my father was an architect, and I took his architecture drafting board to do design work. But I had a lot of friends who were very creative who went into accounting, went into business. And I think that I was scared, so I majored in journalism in undergrad, and only in graduate school I started doing design work. So I agree with Mark and Tasheka that it is expensive. And I think that for design school taught me how to be the only one, and to shine above. So that tax of being a Black design student was real. And maybe a lot of students now may shy away from it because they don't realize that it is a rewarding career, and it could be lucrative, and it's something really satisfying to create outcomes based on your creative drive.
Yeah, I also agree too, because being a recent grad, going to a private school that was predominantly white, I struggled with finding like a confidence and identity within my work. And like you, I think it takes a sense of perseverance to not only get through design school, but succeed and be confident moving forward as you design, because there's so little representation of people who look like you. I would constantly look at agencies and Instagram, anything I could find to find people that looked like me, had, like Ollie said, like a good career, and still be able to like push my identity, figure that out, as well as figure out like a passion that I had for design, which thankfully since I've graduated, I've become more confident, but I know that was a huge struggle for me throughout my whole time at design school.
So Tara, I'm gonna put you on the spot here for a minute since you were the recent grad. When you finished high school, right, what were your options to choosing an art school or a design school, or were you even thinking about that at the time?
Actually, that's a pretty funny question, because in high school I had taken an array of art classes, but I never really knew what I wanted to do because my dad is actually a professor where I graduated from at the university. And my high school experience, there were a lot of racial incidents that affected me. So moving into high school, moving into college, I kind of was lost because I didn't really know what I wanted to do or how to move forward into something that I was enjoying. So I kind of just went to Dayton in hopes that I'd figure it out. And then around my sophomore year, I randomly emailed an advisor because I had randomly looked up art careers because I knew I loved art when I was younger and I'd like to pick it back up. So I emailed my advisor and told him I wanted to have a meeting with him. And then that's just kind of how I got into design. And it was probably the best decision I've made. My experience and happiness went way up after that.
Good. Congratulations.
I just wanted to chime in and echo everything my panelists have said so far, and just echo in particular this idea of a lack of access to design education for Black people, and sort of a lack of possibility models, and sort of the absence of mentorship. I've had a lot of good fortune and privilege in my education and being at a couple of private art schools and getting also professional mentorships, but it's actually only been since March that I've actually had a mentor in design that's Black. So, I think that says a lot about, even someone who's kind of finds a pretty amazing path through design to sort of see the absence of that kind of sort of nurturing and mutual support. And I think that is connected to also what others have been sharing about sort of feeling like an exception, or feeling other, kind of channeling the Du Bois double consciousness or sometimes triple consciousness, depending on other aspects of our identity of feeling a sense of isolation. And I feel like this panel and conversations like this are so exciting because it's creating a sense of how do we create more connection, more opportunity, and more accessibility for Black voices.
Definitely. All right. So we're going to move on to our second question here. And actually, there's some chat about this over in the chat window. I'm going to pose this one. I'm going to let you start this one out, Ali, since you're on that marketing end. What racism exists in higher education, and how can higher education be more authentic when recruiting diverse?
That's a $64 million question. And I'm sure all our participants and the panelists who work in higher ed, that's the question that's the golden goose that lays the golden egg. The conversations we're having at my institution, at my university, is how to be authentic, to say what you mean what you say, to attract students of color and Black students. It has to be more than saying what you're doing as an institution, but you have to actually have a roadmap to make these students feel included and safe. And with that said, I spent most of my career in corporate design, and when I switched to higher ed, I thought, wow, okay, like-minded people who could really kind of relate to me. And when I got to higher ed at UVA, there were a lot of aspects that were less than welcoming. And the racism that exists that I find is a lot of microaggression. The ones that have double meanings, where they saying something but it means completely different. And as a Black person in your experience, you know what they're saying, although everyone else in the room is like, oh, she just asked you a question. And it's pervasive. But again, going back to what Mark had said earlier, is that drilling down to make yourself better, to be inclusive to everyone on your team, but to be the beacon where you are a vital member, and that's crucial. And I think that goes with all fields. And I think that everyone in higher ed considers themselves very open-minded. And I think that, especially in this time, allyship is important. Who am I as a Black designer, and most of my panelists goes a certain way. But what really puts it over the goalpost is having allies who are, say, in hiring committees, and they get resumes for designers that are named Aliatu. You know, consider those people to be vital, not necessarily because of their names, but because of the value that they can bring to your team. And I know I kind of push it a little bit further, but those examples of how we could kind of swell the numbers of Black designers in higher ed, and not just be comfortable of hiring people that look, sound, and act like you, but the voices, the diverse voices attracts diverse student body.
Yeah, can I chime in on that part?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah, because Ali, you brought up a very excellent point about how there's like double meanings in being, when you hear something, you can hear it, and you hear the under part of it where it's like, oh, it's just a question. It's like, no, it's a question of my intelligence.
Yeah.
You know,
did I just hear? And you go back to your office and you're like, okay.
Right. You know, and I think this steps into, or this includes a conversation where oftentimes I think when we talk or discuss racism, we think more of the overt, oh, we're going to call you out of your name, or, oh, we're going to do this. And I think it's very important that we have like a bunch of designers and design educators in here, so we're very familiar with designing systems. And when we talk about isms like racism, sexism, you know, those are systems, and there's so many layers to those systems. And I wanted to bring up Ali's point because that's something that I've run into not only as an educator, but then also with my students, where, you know, I may hear faculty kind of mock how our students will talk. And then I'm thinking, well, that's just how this person talks, you know, and it's so many different microaggressions, and of course macroaggressions as well. And I think that when it comes to, or at least what I've been trying to do, and I've had to catch myself on this with my own students, where I would think, oh, maybe they're not trying as hard, you know, or maybe they don't want it as bad as somebody else does, you know. But what I think about and what I try and push to other people is we do have to think about our students, especially our marginalized and our Black students. They're still people. And instead of a focus on, oh, well, we have to get this, we got to get this project, we got to get this project done, maybe take a class period and say, let me learn from you. Let me learn who you are, like, just, and build a connection, you know. And I think it's important to establish that trust, because if students don't trust the teacher, they're not going to feel comfortable. If they don't feel comfortable, they don't feel heard, they don't feel safe, they're not going to want to be there, you know. And I was looking at some of the questions in the chat, and I hope to answer them with this, where it's about like, how do we recruit Black students, you know, and tell them about our programs. Go to those schools, go to the communities, you know. If there are other Black designers who are working in different industries, build relationships with them, and not about, oh, well, hey, I'm trying to sell you something, you know, because we get sold stuff on a regular basis. We are designers. We know how to build stuff to sell stuff. But if it's something that you truly want to do and it's coming from the heart, be intentional. You know, this is something I've experienced with my local AIGA chapter, where I wanted to go into all sorts of schools, especially K through 12 schools and high schools, to say, yeah, I want to talk to students, and then let's talk about design. Let's bring the entirety of our chapter and then just introduce them to things. Oh, well, we have initiatives and we do have mentorship programs. And I'm like, that's great, but what schools are you targeting? Because if you're targeting the more affluent schools, which, yeah, there will be Black students at affluent schools, but you can't overlook the North Side with low income schools, or the West Side with low-income schools, the East Side with low, like that's another level of that system of implementing and perpetuating racism, you know, because it's the feeling of, oh, well, they don't have the resources. They don't want to do this stuff, but you don't know yet because you didn't go. And then to build on Lucy's point, Lucy's and Tasheka's point, really everyone's point, is that if you can't see it, you can't picture yourself in it. You know, like, because I know when I was in school, I went to school for animation, and I was in senior year, I already decided I'm going into retail because there's no way I can make it as an animator. And we had a guy come in who was applying for an illustration position, an illustration professor position. Black guy, Donovan Howard, who worked at Disney, and he was showing work from Fantasia and Emperor's New Groove. And he's like, yeah, I did this, and I did this, and I did this. And then his own personal work. And I'm like, what? You can do that? You know, so just to see one person make it, you know, especially when a lot of Black students, oftentimes we're the first or doing a lot of the first in our family, you know, it's like, wow, I can see somebody who's doing it. Now I can aim to that, or I have something to work towards, you know. But that was a super long-winded answer. But I definitely wanted to build on Ali's point because
yeah, I'd also like to jump in on that, just because thinking about the move from high school to higher education, and sometimes there might have to be more of an investment in your Black students coming from a high school to a college, because they don't have the confidence of always being hoisted up and saying that their voice matters, or being confident in themselves as they move through education. So I think it's important to understand that it may be their first time in a design arena at all. So they may just need to build some confidence, and the work will grow with them. And I think it's the overall, they need to gain trust in their educators, and they need to have confidence that they can move through and make this career as a possibility for them.
Yeah, and just one more note. Before I started teaching full-time, I was working as a full-time designer in the office, in the design office at Cal Arts. And being an alum from there and working there, and it was actually my first full-time job. I was out of the MFA program. And now thinking back, because I did all the design work for the institution, it definitely was a missed opportunity. 1, I was Black. 2, a woman. 3, I graduated from there. And nobody ever asked or talked to me about my experience or asked how that could be used in recruiting. So, yeah, it's, and I don't know why. And not saying that that was something I was actually focused on when I was working there, but it's just, you know, goes to show you that it wasn't even on their radar. Right? They weren't even really thinking about it in the recruitment sense.
Yeah, I think there can be kind of a blind spot that institutions have to the resources they have, like right under their own roof. So that seems like a huge oversight on CalArts' part. One other thing that I wanted to speak to, and when Mark and Ali were also talking, was also thinking about their recruiting, and also what Tara was saying. Like, if you want to have authenticity in your question, Pierre, from institutions, you need also Black faculty and staff to do the recruiting. So, you know, I think it is a bit of a chicken and the egg issue, but it can be done. Like, I'm thinking of the recent cluster hire of 5 Black faculty at OCAD in Toronto that was just announced. Like, it's not enough just to have one, you know, like my experience in Otis has been amazing, but also I'm often tokenized and asked to do additional labor or just expected to do initial labor, emotional labor, and also like actual labor, like serving on committees and doing service, you know, to create this like illusion of representation and diversity, which is in Otis's mission statement. But particularly now that I have, you know, a promotion, I'm like now adding a little bit more pressure on the institution to actually manifest that. Like, how do we actually recruit and get more diverse faculty, and in particular Black faculty. And I'm not looking for like, you know, a total tipping point, but like it should reflect the population of the students, you know, or the fact that there's 8%, you know, African Americans in Los Angeles. Like Otis should mirror that, and it doesn't at all.
So Lucy, do you have any other strategies you can think about for recruitment?
Oh, well, we just underwent a rebranding of our university. And I will say one of the things that we had to do, and I think somebody in the chat did post about putting in photography, using photography to showcase other students that they can see themselves being in the university. And I will say, at least from where I'm working right now, one of the major things that we were pushing was the diversity. You know, we've never really done a full-blown branding, so we just did one last year, and we are student-centered, or our focus really is on student, and diversity and inclusion is one of the things that our president is really focused on. So I will say, you know, having that buy-in from the top and let it trickle down might be another way, you know, to get students to come or to at least assist with recruitment.
Great. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think, and I was just thinking about this when I was reading through the chat, where another thing that we can think about is having active professionals also work as recruiters in a sense. Not necessarily, oh, you gotta go to school, gotta go to school. Of course, I think that's great, and I'm biased because I'm an educator. But also saying like, oh yeah, you know, maybe shadowing programs or mentorship programs, or, you know, something in the workplace where there are initiatives dedicated to going into schools, you know, or connecting with marginalized and underrepresented communities, you know, to show, to give that exposure and introduce them. You know, because we as educators, especially when you're like the only one of you in your department, you carry the weight of so many worlds, and you have so many students who look like you and they come directly to you with everything. So you're already, that's a juggling act where, you know, and I care a lot more about my students because of that, you know, because they feel comfortable to say, well, you speak like I speak. You can get it. You know, you come from a similar background, and we carry a lot of weight. And this isn't to say that that I don't want to carry the weight, you know, because it's always for the people, it's for the students. But I also think with any active professionals, you know, in the chat, or if you're in different communities or in different groups, whether they're online or in person, maybe it's a workforce initiative, maybe it's a personal endeavor where it's like, you know what, let me connect with a local school. If I can't work with a local design chapter, then let me work with a local design school, or, you know, local K through 12 school, and see how I can get in there, and then really, really just introduce kids to a world that they never knew existed, but has always been around.
Pierre, can I jump in for a second?
Sure, go right ahead, Ali.
I see Gina put something, is it authentic to show more diversity than you have?
Oh.
No, and that's important, because that's really important, and that's another age-old question that every institution, I'm sure, on here is going through. Diversity is not, or inclusion is not in a vacuum. It's not done on spreads of comms pieces on websites. It's not done on social media. It's 360 and it's organic. It's hiring qualified faculty, Black faculty and staff. It's teaching blind spots to exist in faculty and staff. It's preparing your campus for anti-racist area, so when the diversity comes, that these students feel safe, that the faculty feel safe, that the staff feel safe. So it's really 360. It's not just how do we put more Black people or international students or people of color in our communication, but it has to be a holistic top to bottom. And if your organization or your institution is committed to it from top to bottom, they will succeed. But if it's lip service to put a banner in a student center that says Black Lives Matter, but everything else about the institution is completely 180 to that, then it's not going to succeed. Then it's just going to be basically what Mark was saying, your institution selling this to the students. And design has grown over the last few years that it's very inclusive. There's so many aspects of design that there are qualified and interested Black students who want to continue their higher ed in design, but they just don't see who and what is similar to who they are.
Yeah, and I worked at an institution, and it turned my stomach. It was probably 4% minorities in the whole institution. It was a small community college, and all of the marketing pieces started having like 90% people of color in these marketing pieces, which wasn't representational of the institution. I mean, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's almost like, so y'all just gonna find some random Black people and put them in the advertisement? Like, you just, hey, let's grab this stock photo, you know. We just gonna take a picture. We're not gonna tell you what it's for. You probably not even in this program, but it don't even matter because we're trying to recruit. You know, it's that right there will automatically break trust.
Yeah,
because you'll look and say, oh, and I think this speaks to Tara's point as well, where you'll look and you'll see like, oof, I don't really see people who look like me. I don't know if I'm gonna feel comfortable. But then if you do see these communications and these advertisements of, oh man, this looks great, I can't wait to go, and then you get hit with the okie doke, that's a real quick way of, you don't want to start the experience on a bad note, because that sets the tone for how you perceive everything that comes forward, where you become more like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen in this space, or is this space going to do the same thing, where they promote one thing, but then they do something different, you know, and that, I think that comes with, or it's attached to how diversity has become a buzzword, you know, and it's not, the thought process isn't bad, but when it's, oh, we're diverse, it's one thing to say it, but when it is, then you don't have to really say it all the time, you know. And I think to build on Ali's point, top down, from it has to be thorough, not only just recruiting, but how are you supporting, how are you amplifying, how are you nurturing, and not only in this experience, but then, you know, we have students who come in and then they graduate. How do we support them afterwards? Who do we push them towards? How do we help elevate them? You know, it's an entire mind shift. And then this next part will probably go to faculty who are in more privileged positions, you know, especially non-Black faculty. Put yourselves on the line. Like, we have more to lose than you do. So if you're going to advocate for the students, and you know that we're over here fighting so many battles, but you have more leverage of, oh, you know, I've been here longer, or I can connect with this person, cool, you'll be fine. You will be fine. But, you know, we walk on eggshells while y'all walk in the tennis shoes, and it's real comfortable. You know, it's a different experience. So if you're about diversity, if you're about amplifying Black voices, if you're about, you know, amplifying Black students and Black experiences, be about it. And it's not easy. Trust, we know more than anybody it's not easy. But if you're about it, then follow through. But if you're not about it, then at least be honest with yourself. That's how I look at it.
Yeah. All right, wonderful. I'm looking at these questions over here. Michelle Lewis asked here, let's talk about how we can recruit to Black students in this COVID era. That's a toughie there. I mean, since it's so recent and a lot of stuff is online, does anybody have any suggestions on that?
I kind of think that before was brought up, like socioeconomic status and how that can affect design schools. I think it's something that universities should look at is when you're underrepresented in a field, how do you push that inclusion? And I think coming up with grants or telling kids how they'll be supported financially so they can contribute and be a part of something. So I think that's something that definitely needs to be looked at and pushed towards Black students so they feel supported even when you're online.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you go, because I'm still thinking. So you could.
No, I think that looking at the chat earlier, someone said relationships. What a novel idea. And I think design is one of the fields that are based on relationships. So in COVID-19, when everything is virtual, it's great to build relationships, to have virtual town hall meetings with principals, vice principals, to gather students together, to tell them about what their program is and their institution, and that'll be a good start to connect with the students via where they are, is at the schools, connect with the principals, the administrators at these high schools, these middle schools, to say that you are a viable organization and you would love to have them. And it's all about relationships. And if you don't sign up any students, at least that relationship is there, where next year you'll come and you welcome with open arms and you become a fabric and a fixture to create not only a pipeline, but relationships with the students who are there. Maybe they don't enroll in the design program, but maybe they give your institution another look because they are comfortable with the relationship they have with you, whether coming into the school in person or seeing you virtually. So relationships, relationships, relationships.
Yeah, I think, and to build on that, man, I think that's such an excellent question about recruiting students, especially in the time of COVID. It's an excellent question because it's one that we need to reckon with, but I also think it's a question that is hard to answer because I think we're in a shift of everything is upside down. So and I think it might be safe to really believe that being in flux is normal. Granted, this is a different type of flux that I don't think anybody really expected, but I wonder if in order to recruit Black students in the time of COVID, I think one of the biggest things to think about is if we recruit them, what will be there for them? You know, what would be the end that we're recruiting them to come to us and then go towards? And that's something I feel that I've been thinking about it as well, especially as we plan for fall, where I think we could recruit students, but where are we sending them to? Or like the class of 2020, looking so forward to graduation, and now it's like, well, should I apply for that job? I'm like, you probably could. I don't know what's going to happen or if it's going to be there, just because there's so many things. Like COVID is not like a tangible thing we can control. Well, that's debatable. Let me rephrase that. It's something that has so much impact, you know, and I think when we think about this question of how do we recruit Black students during the era of COVID, we also have to think about what future do we want to build for them to step into? You know, because I think we have a bit more insight as educators, as professionals, and a bit more history of working as creatives. You know, so now I think we have to redefine like what's the end goal, or what are various end goals. Then I think from there we can start to answer, how do we go back and recruit them? Because now we can tell them where to go, or a general idea of where to go, as opposed to, hey, gave you these skills, good luck. You know, because then it may clash with our intentions. You know, so that's excellent question, which is really great that you brought up. Man, y'all got us thinking. Whew. But I love it. I love it. It's good. It's good.
All right. So let's go ahead and jump into the next question I have here. And Tasheka, if you want to start with this one. How do you show your work is comparable to your non-Black peers in regards to skill set without whitewashing your content?
Now, Pierre, that's what I struggled with.
I know.
Oh, okay. Well, I can just say, I mean, putting a portfolio together when you leave school and you're looking for work is something that all designers struggle with, right? I mean, it's not necessarily just a problem for Black students who are graduating and trying to find work, or Black designers, but oftentimes we have to tell our portfolio to the type of jobs that we want, right? But oftentimes a lot of minority students in general tend to, a lot of times the content of their work has to do with their identity, right? Has to do with their culture, has to do with their place. And so they try to express that a lot through their work. I would say having a balance between the two. So having enough work in there that authentically shows who you are and the type of content that you're interested in. Also balancing that with other type of projects, right? I think, you know, looking back, I know that I had to kind of take out a lot of work out of my portfolio and change things up, just so people wasn't so distracted by the content in itself, because they weren't able to kind of see past the subject matter that I was interested in. They only started focused on, it seemed like there was a focus on the type of work as opposed to looking at my skill set. So that's a tough one. I mean, I think it's just about balance and showing your skills and how diverse your skills are throughout. But I think it's also important for you to be true to yourself, and hopefully that somebody will sort of see and appreciate your perspective and appreciate your connection to your identity and to your culture, and that could be used as an advantage, right, in the workplace, as opposed to you having to hide it, right?
Mm-hmm. Anybody else like to share?
Well, I can share a little bit of my experience in college. During college, when we were given a project that was open-ended, I always used to take that opportunity to showcase something that was reflecting on me and my culture. And I remember in one of the painting classes that I took, you know, you had your life drawing, and then you had object drawing and all that. And then the end of semester project was an open-ended project where you could do whatever it is that you wanted to do. You know, looking at what the other students were doing in class, it was like, okay, we've done that, I've done that. You know, I was like, I gotta do something different. Now, did I feel like I needed to stand out? Maybe because I was pretty much the only Black student in that class. Just to share what Tasheka was saying, but it's finding those opportunities. So what I did, I did a whole series of 10 drawings, I think, on African head wraps. So it's trying to find or seek those opportunities where you can showcase or put in a little bit of what you are all about into your work. Now, when it comes to professional, that's a little bit different. You know, there are certain things and goals that you have to achieve. So that one is a little bit difficult to do when you're in the professional field. But whatever that opportunity presents itself, I try to do that. So far, professionally, it hasn't really presented itself, but I'm always seeking. So I guess what I'm trying to say is always seek for those opportunities where there is no limit, and take advantage of those.
And I think also to that, I think the more experience you get, I think the more confidence you have at feeling like you don't have to sort of hide that type of work, right? I mean, so I think that's sort of the main thing, is hoping to sort of get the opportunity to where your career advances itself to where people are actually seeking you out, right? For that type of work, as opposed to you feeling like you have to kind of disguise it. And I would say also seeking opportunities to work with nonprofit organizations or doing community work, you know, things like that. Again, with people, working with people that would sort of appreciate that type of work. And one of the projects that I remember specifically, Pierre, is thinking about that question again, is when I graduated from Cal Arts, we had this project that was like an end of the year book, where you had to basically sort of take all your work in grad school and you make a book and you sort of presented that. This was outside your thesis project. And the name of my book was called Yes, I'm an Angry Black Woman. And so it was really big type on magenta. You know, the cover was like hot pink, and it was, you know, it was just really bold and aggressive. And I think that just really scared people. And my name was Tasheka, you know. So like, I don't know what to do with her, you know. But yeah, hopefully nobody has to do that. And I would say just don't give up, you know, just sort of keep trying and keep pushing your work through that until somebody basically can appreciate that voice. Right?
Hey, Pierre?
Yes.
Coming off what Tasheka just said, you know, and her end of the year book, I'd love to hear Silas's point on his question, because he has a firm where he's doing business with clients, and I'd love to hear his point of view about working as a Black designer, but having clients where, again, objectives and audiences are met.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was about to jump in on this question too, and like trying to formulate it, because I feel like, Pierre, your question is quite complex. And my own experience is also quite mixed, and kind of like my studio Polymodal, which, you know, was the name of my thesis at Cal Arts. Tasheka and I overlapped 1 year there too, and I think we had some conversations about being, you know, Black designers there, but it wasn't until we actually started teaching together at VCFA, which has been kind of amazing because it's one of the few places where there are 3 Black faculty, so you don't have to be the only person.
That's the first thing I noticed.
In sort of like this idea of like othered, it just feels like we're faculty from a lot of different backgrounds and dimensions. And in each of us, even the 3 Black faculty, have really different experiences, you know, personally. You know, one of our colleagues, Zidi, is from Tanzania, you know, and my mom is from Uganda, but my dad's from Minnesota. So my thesis was really looking at like, how does the identity of a designer relate to their work? And like, how do you create a space of expressing that? And a lot of my teaching has been helping designers find a way to put their voice in that. And it's funny because I've been having conversations with my business partner who's not Black, but somehow our studio tends to get projects that are like for a Black artist or a queer artist or a Black and queer artist, which for me like is amazing and super gratifying because it lines up with what I wanted to do, where I wanted to have like a connection between myself and the kind of work that I was doing and potentially audiences of the design work. On the flip side, lately I've been thinking a lot about this idea of being pigeonholed, you know, and sort of like, oh, is like Silas the person they go to do like, you know, work that's like about Blackness? And, you know, we have other projects that are not about that and starting to do more, but I don't know, I guess I'm not saying, I think this notion of feeling pressure to either like have some kind of erasure of yourself, or this like need to conform, is a very real thing that's like part of the pedagogy and part of like
design discussions about like cleanness or modernism or like how design should or could be. So I guess I struggle with that a lot still later on, but I will have to say it is very validating to be able to serve as a designer and to be able to like speak to or work with content that reflects myself. I think that's very empowering, and I would encourage anyone to do that and to say that you can make a sustainable practice of doing that.
I think that's Silas. I just want to build on that, and really everyone's point, which is great. And I think it leads into a conversation of what if we consider redefining what professional means? You know, where it's like, oh, your work is a little bit too Black. I don't know if that's really professional. It's like, why would Blackness not be professional? You know, and this is just like some rambling and thinking, but I think that's something we should all just consider thinking about, where is when you start talking about like the aesthetics and when we learn about design history and, you know, what is good design. Mm-hmm. And this is something I actually had a conversation about with a friend of mine, Carlos, where he mentioned that good design, good in quotations, it can be very subjective because, you know, what's good in the Eurocentric academic space, you know, compared to if you're in a Black or brown neighborhood, and those aesthetics and those approaches to design and color and understanding, you know, typography and composition and communication of messages, you know, why would that not be good when it's hitting the goals of, you know, communicating things, setting up a visual aesthetic? You know, it was a very nuanced conversation, but it made me think, what if we sat down and rethought what does professional mean? You know, especially just really across the board, like what does that look like? What does that mean? You know, especially if we think about our personal experiences, and especially with Black women in hair, you know, like, oh, if you have your hair a certain way, that's not professional. We have to rethink what professional means. So.
I have a question. Pierre, I have a question.
Oh, he's muted. No, Pierre, you're muted.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, go right ahead, Ali. I'm sorry.
Tasheka, did you give a presentation at the in Portland?
Portland, no.
At the UCDA?
I did not.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that was Aldrina.
Yeah,
that's my buddy.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. But I know Aldrina. Yeah.
This little brown girl.
And she went to VCFA, right?
Yes.
Okay, so sorry. Yeah. Okay. All right. That was a really good presentation.
Yeah.
Do you want to just give some context about that presentation? How bringing that to space?
Tasheka, you probably know her better and probably know the presentation, but it was a presentation about what it is to be a Black woman in the design space and the personal, professional quandaries or netherworld that she lived in, and how her experiences kind of pushed her through these different obstacles. And I remember seeing it, and that it was so different from any design presentation that I've seen, because it was so personal, that it kind of resonated with me. And then when Tasheka, when you said the name of your piece, I thought that was the same piece, but these personal pieces are really worth mentioning when it comes to design.
Any other? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Were you saying Pierre? Sorry.
No, I was just going to move on, but you have another comment?
I do, but I was going to sort of address what Mark said as well, but I'm looking at the time, so I think we could perhaps move on to the next.
Okay.
My bad, y'all.
That's all right. So the next question is going to be a pretty big one, and please, anybody jump in. So this is basically focused on, while we're doing this here, how do we elevate and amplify Black designers within the UCDA, and where can Black designers succeed in the field? While you're thinking about that, also think about how do we find tangible results towards amplifying Black voices when there are few examples in our history books, classrooms, and design firms. I'll let you marinate on that one for a while.
See, Pierre, them the questions you got to type in the chat so we can keep referencing.
I can do that quickly. I'll do that. Hold on.
I mean, just a general sort of obvious thing, I think, is definitely, and if you guys hear a kid in the background, that's my son. So sorry. Anyway, I think obviously, you know, there are a lot of educators on here. There are a lot of us who work in institutions. So obviously inviting people to come speak to your students or to your institution and invite them to feel comfortable to talk about their work, right? To talk about their journey, not just, you know, I don't know. I think that's sort of the start, is to make sure you are inviting these people into your spaces where you work so they can show their work. Invite them to, you know, have exhibitions, right? Invite them to be able to have opportunities to show their work in places and spaces where a lot of people don't get to experience work by Black designers, or even get a chance to have a conversation with them. I think obviously panels like this and ones that have been happening over the past couple of weeks is a start, but I think actually having them come, you know, being able to bring them and their work into the actual spaces, which we don't know when that's going to be able to happen because of the pandemic. But again, I think it's a start. So for instance, Cal Arts had every Thursday over the past month, they've been having features of Black artists, alum, feature their work on their website, and it was virtual. So you can go in, whether it was a musician or it was a writer, you can go in on the website every Thursday night between a certain time and sort of view that particular artist's work. Sometimes it was a performance, sometimes it was a live reading, sometimes it was, you know, a photographer or a designer. So I think those are ways. Maybe some people have other ideas.
I can add on to what Tasheka is saying. I think in my experience, what I've seen that has happened and help actually boost students, especially students' confidence, is inviting alums to come back and do a class presentation. I've seen that happen a lot. And I had the opportunity of attending, it was more like an artist group, and it had all sorts of artists, you know, designers, musicians, photographers, and just having a 2-hour session where people were invited to, you know, talk about their business, talk about the experience, you know, talk about the ups and downs, the challenges that they have faced, you know, in their professional experience. I think those are ways of, you know, trying to show other people that there are other people out there who are also doing the same thing, who, you know, have had struggles just as you have, but they've overcome it. So.
Building off what Lucy's saying, and it's important, I think that it's not necessarily, I think it's always what the next steps are. And Pierre, your question about amplifying Black designers within UCDA. So this is an amazing panel. I think what's the next step for UCDA? How do how does the organization build these voices into programming going forward? And I think that will be a crucial next step. I attended the event in Portland last year, and I felt I was probably one of 2 or one of 3 Black higher ed design professionals And when I got home, I had a lasting impression on me, not that I was the one of two or three, but because how do I lift my voice within this organization that I consider my profession? So what we did in our design team, we did a rebrand, we did a lot of design work, and we flooded the design awards with work from our institution, just to say that we're here and there's a voice to us. So with that said, I asked about the program in Atlanta in October, which may or may not be in person, but I think that's a great opportunity since it's being in Atlanta, which is home of a lot of HBCUs. How do these HBCUs tackle the idea of promoting Black designers, but also how do they target being design professionals in higher ed? And it would have been a great breakout session with members part of the HBCU. So these are two different ways that I think UCDA going forward could really keep amplifying these voices.
Yeah, and I think to build on everyone's point, one of the biggest things is archiving. You know, like archive and set up databases with resources, you know, like, because there's a bunch in the chat, which thank everyone for dropping all these links in the chat. That's super awesome. You know, like I'll always reference Jacinda Walker's Design Explorer for K through 12 and STEAM and design education for students, you know, with Aldrina Quarter's project with This Little Brown Girl, Maurice Cherry with Revision Path podcast, you know, just archiving. And there's so many more, but I'll find them through, oh, guess what I Googled, or, oh, I just happened to click this link, or wow, I saw you on LinkedIn, you know, so there's so many. Even recently, Beyonce posted on her website, granted, I haven't checked the website recently, but I know when she did, I think Black Parade came out, her song, and she had a whole link dedicated to a host of Black-owned businesses right there. And then I saw Blacks Who Design. Then I saw a couple of people who I know, you know, who are already on there. So having those, if we think about diversity and inclusion, we also have to think about accessibility, you know, and how do we make these resources accessible, but then how do we also archive them so then they're not, you know, there's no gatekeeping. Like, oh, you have to sign up in order to get to this resource. So you have to make sure you make make an account and a membership, and make sure you put your deposit before you actually get the good stuff. You know, that is counterproductive. So I think archiving, and we see it, you know, we have two amazing educators whose work is built on history, and wondering why are there no Black designers in history? If it wasn't archived, that speaks to the importance of archiving and documenting and making sure that it exists and that it's also accessible, so then it becomes common knowledge. So that's one thing we can think about, in addition to the myriad of amazing ideas that everyone else suggested.
Yeah, I want to echo like what people have been saying about signal boosting, and, you know, just highlighting Black designers that are doing work that's innovative and present, and, you know, it's happening already. I think at the same time, part of what's necessary to evolve is to be comfortable being uncomfortable, is to be having more uncomfortable conversations about why there's such a dearth of this representation in university design programs, but, you know, both the designers that are like designing for the university, and then also students within those programs, faculty, staff. And that's harder than just sort of like archiving a resource, or, you know, me writing a paper about Du Bois, or, you know, giving a presentation. That's actually kind of the work of design that's not so graphic or visual, but it's actually redesigning systems of oppression. And I love the term gatekeeping. I think that's like a big one that was just mentioned, that is like a big part of what we really need to confront. And it is going to require a number of folks being uncomfortable. And what I'm interested in is how to find a balance. I was recently suggested to read this book called Tempered Radicals by Deborah Meyerson, which I found very helpful because I'm very interested in pushing change and creating change. But I think it can't happen totally from complete cancellation and totally shutting down the conversation. I'm not saying that there's not dismantling and things that need to be taken apart and not, brought back. But I think being able to enter into the space of pushing past sort of old models of racial divides and conversations that are across experiences, lived experience and across race is going to be really important at the same time while we challenge white supremacy and systemic institutionalized racism.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to when Tasheka was saying that she had to kind of like diversify her portfolio of work with her experience and then other work as well. Like being a Black designer is super powerful because you bring a perspective that maybe people don't understand, but to the group of people that aren't being represented, it's a powerful thing to where they feel included. So maybe it's the viewer's time to practice, I would say, like humility in some way and be like, I don't understand, but let's take the steps to improve. And because when you're working with a more diverse group of designers and people, you're going to get better too.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I lost this thought over here in the chat room, but somebody mentioned affordability for UCDA, for students to go to their conferences. I mean, a lot of students really can't afford it. I don't know too much about how conferences are run on the inside and all that, but I think scholarships to students. I mean, like you mentioned, you're down in Atlanta. Offer a whole design class to come for one conversation there, or invite them in to have a conversation, one of the HBCUs, or I'm sure that would bring in more diverse students, even to your conference, just to watch them speak. And I think it's the affordability is big, especially, I mean, that's basically with any student, because I mean, design students are always spending money on materials. They got to buy their computers, It's not like you're an English major and you're buying paper and pencils. Not to knock any English majors out there. But affordability was big with me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also it's almost, because sometimes I'll look at conferences and I'm like, what am I going to get from it? You can drop a couple hundred to a couple thousand and you have to travel and get your room. Like it's all of this. And then you think, well, what is it that I'm going to gain from the experience? So maybe, or to build on top of that, I think the conferences are important, and you may have something that can provide more incentive for students to go, but then also more dissemination of what came from the conference, outside of the paywall, because if I can't go there and see the video, or if I can't go there to see the presentation, can I see the video? Oh yeah, you can if you pay like a couple $100. Like, maybe if people attend the conferences and they have their notes, they take those back to the students, to the schools, to the communities, so just the dissemination.
Yeah, I want to second that, Mark. I question sort of the flash in the pan aspect of a conference, and often the one way, like experts talking and to acolytes. And I feel like the kind of work that needs to happen needs to be more like this, like more conversation, more dialogue, and also sustained things. Like, how do you create working groups? I'm thinking of a university of like a faculty learning community, but like, I feel like even that has hierarchies. Like, are there ways that you can connect students and staff and faculty and administration, in ways? And I think it's going to be work that is long-term and repeated and ongoing, rather than, I feel like a conference has a lot of like splash and like it's a moment and then it's kind of back to reality afterwards. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. So it's up to you, Mr. Moderator.
No, any other thoughts on this? We can move right along.
I was wondering, there was a kind of a tough question that was like a while back in the chat, but it was a couple of people were talking about instances of, trying to like sort of summarize this without like using too much jargon, but it was basically like, how do you create a supportive educational environment for students of color and faculty of color when there's basically like hate speech happening, or kind of statements that are creating this sense of like unsafety. And so I was like, there were like two questions phrased differently in two different institutions, and sort of like what happens after that. Or even at my own institution, I missed some of these because I was on vacation, but there were a series of town halls after response to Black Lives Matter at Otis, and both with students, with faculty, and then also alumni. And based on people who have went to those and like quotes I've seen from them, they're really painful and super awkward. And kind of figuring out like how to respond to where this notion of feeling like unsafe. And I know that like for me, as someone who has multiple vulnerabilities in terms of society or like in a room, I'm always sort of thinking about trying to create aspects of safety or like a safe space, but also knowing it's like maybe safer, but not totally possible. And Antoinette Carroll was saying a few things at last weekend's where the Black Designers Conference about, rather than trying to have safer space, dealing with this idea of uncomfortability and like having uncomfortable conversations, and how do you do that in a way that's productive and generative. And I guess I don't really have an answer, but I feel like I'd love to hear from the panel about that, and like how you think how to navigate this idea of like when, you know, there's overt racism or comments that are offensive or hurtful, and like how to work through that.
Yeah, and that's important. I mean, my institution is grappling with that as well, and nothing is gained in comfortable places. So, Silas, the idea of being uncomfortable that's just going to happen, and anyone who thinks that they will get through this era with hate speech or social injustice or discrimination or even COVID-19 without having an uncomfortable conversation, they're being disillusioned. So with that said, your institution has to really put their money where their mouth is, and to start these uncomfortable conversations, but to really value everyone's voice honestly and equitably, and not value one voice over the next. And institutions are really, really grappling with this. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens when we get on the other side of COVID-19 with this kind of double-headed monster of the apocalypse. But yeah, honest conversations have to be had on college campuses of how do we make people feel safe and valued. And when that's not done, or if it's not done effectively, or it's not done with substance, then it's not being done right.
Yeah. I guess, I mean, I agree totally with you, Silas. I mean, can't be afraid to speak up, you know. It's the elephant in the room, so it's got to be done.
Yeah, I think God, that's such a hard question to, it's a hard question to answer in a politically correct way. Meaning, you know, because I know we'd be recorded. But what I think about is it's tough because on one end, you think about, okay, we got to have the conversations and okay, I'll just ramble a little bit and please check me on time. I think that it gets frustrating because being in a space, especially of advocacy and activism, and being from a marginalized and oppressed group, oftentimes is, oh man, I'm now understanding what you're going through, but can you teach me more? What resources do you have? Can I learn from this? Can I learn from this? And it's like, fam, I'm out here looking at Black death and trauma on a regular basis, and you still want me to teach on top of my regular teaching job? You know, and I get the importance of the educational component to break down why terms, why sentiments are inherently rooted in evil. And it's like, yeah, let's call that out. Let me explain why. But then on the flip side, the other side of me is like, just throw them away, get them out, you know, because to be in a place where we have to constantly, we're constantly, as Black designers, as Black people, as brown people, Indigenous people, BIPOC, you know, across all really different intersected experiences, we constantly have to talk about our validity of being human. And it's very exhausting to say, hey, you shouldn't say that. Why? Because I'm a person, you know, like, oh, you shouldn't say hate speech. Well, I have freedom of speech, and yeah, I got the freedom to live. So, you know, it's tough. And then also to say, how do we provide safe spaces, you know, for our students and really our faculty? I think that, I don't think it falls on the plate or on the shoulders of the oppressed to solely figure out how to provide safe spaces for us, you know, because we already have to live through our experiences. So then to say, oh, well, this is how you protect us. It's like, man, it's additional work that we have to do. Like it's additional work that we're tasked to do to help you be better humans and protect us to just live. And that one, it just gets really tough. And I'm sorry for repeating that, but I'm trying the best way to explain that I feel if you're looking to create a safe space, I think it echoes back the point that I made earlier in the conversation, where you will have to put yourself on the line to speak up and to say something. Because the thing about it is, you know, our experiences, that's full-time. We got full-time oppression. But when you, with allyship, you know, and I appreciate allies, I respect y'all, you know, just remember that it's also a part-time gig for y'all. That you can kind of show up, oh snap, it's getting uncomfortable, deuces. You know, that's not a luxury that we have. And to also be in a space of an ally and a conspirator, you also have to be in a place of, okay, well, it's gonna get real. It's just gonna hit the fan and I'm gonna have to deal with it, you know? And of course it's uncomfortable. Trust, we know, but if you have a leverage or a privilege to set up a space or to at least be vocal and you get to be heard, utilize that superpower that you have. You know, because oftentimes we have to go over and beyond we're vocal by default, but in order to be heard and acknowledged, that's a real catch-22. That's a hit or miss for Black people, for marginalized people, you know. But when you got access to privilege, and the best way I can put it is like this: Black people can tell you something all day, but if you have, and this is specifically talking to white people, but if you have a white person tell you the exact same thing, that's when it clicks. So use your superpower, and I use that term loosely, use your superpower to set up those safe spaces, but then also say, Black folks, marginalized folks, what do you need? How can I support you? How can I put myself on the line to make sure you're good? You know,
Mark, you asked us to check you on time, and
thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Yes,
Thank you.
I'm here to help you out.
Thank you. Teamwork, make a dream work.
You summed that up greatly, Mark. Summed it up, the whole panel. I mean, I'm sure they agree. You summed that up greatly here at the end.
Agreed.
Yeah. So in closing, this conversation is not over, all right? And it doesn't need to end. If you have any topics pertaining to the Black American design diaspora, feel free to contact Gina and Chris at the UCDA. Their information, I'm sure, is on their website. I ask everyone to continue this conversation on their campus by welcoming Black professionals to come to your college or university to speak. Start including projects in your curriculum that require research of Black American designers. All our visitors, thank you for being here. Save that chat. There are a whole lot of resources that I see popping up in that chat window. And they're all wonderful resources, I'm sure. Thank you all. It was great for our panel. All right.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing. Yeah, the chat was recorded, so we can figure out how to post that when we post the video, which hopefully will be in the next couple of days. And like Pierre said, this is just the scratching the surface. Thank you so much for attending and giving us your time. Really appreciate it.
Hey, Gina.
Yeah.
I saw there's one comment on a chat that we provide you with our email, website.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
Send it, and then we can send it out to everybody.
Okay.
I have some of that information, but I don't want to share